Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Thanks for stopping by. Today, we have 3 new stories. These are all true haunted house stories. They're pretty creepy. I hope you guys enjoy. As a quick note, if you have a story that you'd like to submit, please check the description. My email's going to be listed there. I'd absolutely love to hear from you guys. That being said, our first story comes from Amherst Doldrums 1890, entitled Haunting Went Dormant, Reactivating Again? When I moved into my boyfriend's house, he told me his former roommates adamantly maintained that the house was haunted. They had both seen and heard multiple inexplicable instances while living there. When I first moved in about a year ago, I definitely noticed a presence in the house for sure. There were 3 major incidents that confirmed the haunting for me. The first was one night when my boyfriend was at work, 3rd shift, so I was home alone from about 11 p.m. to 5 or 6 a.m. Just me and the cat, who was a little wary of me at first, but was happy to have someone to let him in and out at his leisure. One night, around 2 or 3 in the morning, I was watching Netflix and paused because I kept hearing an odd sound. I thought at first it might be the cat coughing up a hairball. It almost sounded like that, but there was something just off about it. I went into the room the sound seemed to be coming from. The cat has a tendency to slink under the couch when he's feeling particularly unsociable, so I knelt to see if he was ensconced down there. I couldn't see, so I got up and turned the light on. Immediately, the wheeze, rasp, or cough stopped. At this point, I saw the cat wedged between the TV and the wall on the other side of the room and looking absolutely terrified. I scooped him up and brought him in the other room, where he stayed glued to my side for the rest of the night. The second incident was not my sighting, but my boyfriend's. He was coming home from work and pulling up to the front of the house. As he was pulling up to the sidewalk, he claimed that he saw a woman on his front step. She was wearing a long white gown, had flowing black hair. Most disconcerting of all, she was looking straight at him, he said. Our next door neighbor's cherry tree passed between them as he drove past it, and she was suddenly gone. He came in the door looking extremely disconcerted. "Were you just outside?" he asked. I'd been running around trying to get ready to leave for work, having just gotten dressed in clothes that were decidedly not a long white gown. The final incident was really more of a weird series of events. My boyfriend and I were both seeing what we thought was our cat out of the corner of our eye, only to discover him in a completely different room or spot he couldn't possibly have gotten to so quickly from where we thought we saw him. Another odd occurrence was once, just out of morbid curiosity, I left my laptop camera recording when my boyfriend and I went to the grocery store. Upon getting back and reviewing it, there was only one sound that didn't seem like traffic or cat sounds. It was a brief, rumbling little growl. There were also a number of times when our cat went missing only to turn up trapped in the basement. We always make a point of leaving the door open if he follows us in there, which is why this stood out to us so much. We would get home from the store or whatever and find the door closed, and the poor furry fella meowing pitifully to be let out. After that, there was sort of a dormant period, for lack of a better description. We didn't see or hear anything especially strange. However, in the last couple weeks, my boyfriend and I have begun seeing something out of the corner of our eyes again. Yesterday, when I was painting in our sunroom, I looked down to see my water cup sliding across the wooden shelf on my easel. I had brought my laptop in and set it in an empty chair to have background noise. Once when I looked up, I saw the cursor moving across the screen, just out of reach and while I was completely alone in the house. Has anyone else ever lived somewhere that went through phases of dormancy and then seemed to reactivate itself? It definitely is always those little things that go bump in the night. Our next story comes from Monkey Boy 2004. Now, just a side note, this was actually sent to me in a personal DM, so I'm not going to be able to link a page. I had some relatives, not exactly sure of the relation, but they had a house that I'm convinced is haunted. The history I know is that the daughter of the owners of this house dabbled in some Ouija boards and other stuff when she was younger. In the summer of '99, her mother passed, causing a bunch of family members I had never met before to come to town. I was 14 at the time, and a cousin who was around my sister and I's age came around, and we inevitably ended up spending time with him in the house mentioned before. He told us the house was haunted, and I called bullshit, so he invited my sister and I to stay with him there. This was his grandfather's house. His grandmother had just passed away. He claimed the upstairs was the only spot haunted and that nobody ever went up there, but that's where we would stay, and so begins a night I'll never forget. Two things I must emphasize. This was 22 years ago. I was a kid, and it's entirely possible that my cousin was somehow messing with us. That being said, here we go. I honestly don't remember much of the early evening, what we did, or if anything happened, but what I do remember is bedtime. We were all too scared to sleep alone, so we laid awake in the same bed. The first thing that I remember is a pillow that was on the headboard of the bed being thrown against the wall by itself. I remember seeing this. We decided to pick the pillow up, at which point it was launched again. This continued for some time until we stopped picking it up. At that point, I remember we went into the bathroom in a group out of fear and stumbled upon a book called A Ghost Around the House. The homeowner claimed to have no knowledge of this book the next morning when we asked. Once we returned in the bedroom, we laid our heads under the covers, and at one point the blanket was lifted off of us as if someone had grabbed two corners and quickly lifted it up and down, like when you make a bed. The blankets floated down, revealing just our heads. As this happened, the fitted sheet under us was pulled off the bed. At this point, it was about 4 a.m. My cousin decided to grab the pillow again, which frustrated my sister, and she threw it herself off the bed, and at that point it all stopped. I never heard from that cousin again, but the story doesn't end there. Several years later, that homeowner would die, and he chose to spend his last days in the house with his family. At one point, his son left the room to take a minute to himself when he claims that the room filled with a bright light, and he heard what sounded like flapping for several seconds. Once the room clears, his sister walked in to inform him that his father had passed. He would go on to inherit that house and ultimately sell it. Several months after the sale of the house, he received a call from the new homeowner asking if there was something he didn't tell him about the house. He played dumb, but when pressed, he told of his sister's activities when they were younger, and that some believe it to be haunted. At this point, the new owner told him his own story. He said he had started renovations on the house, but had stopped and left several things unfinished for quite some time. And one night, while lying in bed, he felt something grab his legs and he was pulled out of his bed onto the floor. He felt like he was being pushed to finish his work and put the house back together. That's the last I ever heard about the house. So yeah, kind of crazy. That almost sounds a little bit like poltergeist activity. I'm not sure. Our last story comes from QueenOzymandias, entitled, I moved into a house and something is trying poorly to mimic my cat. I moved to my current address a few months ago, and as my family and I were moving in, our upstairs neighbor told us that the house is fairly active for paranormal activity. I didn't really know what to think. I don't consider myself a skeptic or a believer, but there are truly no explanations for the things I've experienced. The first big experience I had in the house was a few days after we started moving in. We were only moving from another city over, so we decided to kind of take our time with the move. My mother and brother had taken the U-Haul back to the apartment to load up belongings, while I stayed behind and started to move the boxes into rooms. I was moving boxes from the living room into the kitchen, and when I looked up to look out the window, I found a man in an old black suit and a hat walking down the sidewalk to the backyard. He didn't look at me, he just walked straight back. I thought at first he was possibly the property manager or owner. I opened up the back door to go and meet him, but he disappeared. That was before the neighbor warned me. He told me that the malicious activity mostly takes place in the basement. Snarls, thrown rocks, scratches. I've only experienced knocking sounds and weird shadows. And his son's bedroom upstairs. He told me his son was dragged out of bed by the ankles. Most of what I've experienced has been in the kitchen. I often hear people walking upstairs in areas that have since been boarded up. There's a staircase that the owners boarded up and turned into a pantry. Stuff is constantly getting knocked off the countertops and thrown to the floor. I was also grabbed once when sweeping the floor. I haven't really given it any attention or tried to contact or communicate because it hasn't really impacted me. A lot of it I just thought was weird and figured it's an old house. Old houses do weird things. Last night was completely different. It was around 2:30 in the morning. I was in bed, trying my best to sleep when I heard something in the living room or kitchen make the weirdest noise I've ever heard in my life. It sounded like a man yelling, trying to mimic a cat in heat. It was not my cat. He's neutered and was asleep at my feet. I mentioned mimicry in the title because sometimes my cat makes yowling noises when he's out in the kitchen. He really likes the way his meowing and carrying on echoes back to him. This was not that sound. It was not a cat outside. I have the windows closed and the air conditioning on. This sound was inside the house. I have no idea what could have made this noise other than something supernatural. It scared the hell out of me, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I'm kind of concerned. I don't know if I should truly be concerned. Is this a sign that whatever entities are in the house are getting bolder? Are they trying to target my cat? I'd love to hear if you have any ideas on what it could be, or if you've experienced similar things, especially what happened after. I've heard a few stories like this. Most of the time it's the playful spirit who is just trying to have a little fun. Generally they're not too malicious, but I'm not an expert, so I'm not 100% sure. I hope you guys enjoyed today's stories. Again, if you have one to submit, please check my description for my email. But we'll see you in the next video.